England has been in some form of lockdown for most of this year. Having finally ended all this in the second half of July, August is the first full month that everything has been fully reopened again. The hope at the start of this year was that rolling out vaccines to maybe 70% of the population would be enough to push the R number below 1, which would force cases down and down and down. But as time has gone on, it's become apparent that this isn't going to happen. Right now, 88% of over 16s have had one dose of the vaccine, and 79% have had two, and yet cases continue to grow. But deaths still remain much lower than in previous waves. I think the rise in cases has been blamed on the new, far more virulent Delta variant, which spreads more easily and even undermines the effectiveness of vaccines somewhat. Under 18s didn't start getting vaccinated until very recently, so it's possible that the majority of the spread has been between younger people. August also happens to be the one month of the year where schools aren't open, but it does mean that families are going on holidays and to large public events again. Deaths are low, either because Delta is much less deadly, or much more likely because the majority of elderly and vulnerable people are now vaccinated. And while the vaccines aren't enough to stop the disease or the spread, they do seem to significantly cut down on serious cases and the mortality rates. I think that's a pretty objective monthly summary right there. I try to do a summary because I don't think this video's purpose is to inform people who are watching it in September 2021, but rather to quickly educate viewers from somewhere in the future on the situation as of August 2021. At the start of this pandemic, a video every month seemed appropriate, but it's gone on for so long now that I can't imagine anybody wanting to sit through this whole series, one video after another, because there's now a hell lot of overlap with every month. To summarise, although it's a pandemic, these days it's a lot less about the fear of the virus and more about the frustration at the relentless voices from the anti-vax movement, and at the fact that there's still no end to this ordeal in sight. It's not like anybody wants to get the disease, but we don't want to water down our existence forevermore either. And I think a lot of us are tired of it by now. It's just a shame the virus isn't it? It's hard to remember how long I thought this would last back in March 2020 when it all began for me. I held out hope that vaccines would be the end of it, and while the vaccines were approved sooner than I had expected, it turns out it takes longer than I had expected for them all to be rolled out across a country's population. I didn't know that a second dose would be required, and now it sounds like a third might be on the table, which extends this vaccine rollout further. I don't think that last year I ever saw this lasting longer than August 2021. I thought that by now, either the government's measures to contain it would have, contained it, or that vaccines would have eradicated it from all but the darkest depths of the seediest of places. Yet here we are and it's still everywhere. But things have changed. August 2021 is a return to normality. I can go to the gym, I can go to the cinema, I can go to a nightclub and lick pool tables if I really want to. And the biggest change for me in the last month is that now I'm beginning to want to do those things again. There is always the risk that I could catch COVID and spread it onto everybody I know. But I've done my time, I've had my 2 doses of vaccine, and if I don't return to normal now, then I'm beginning to ask myself, when will I? Look at how things can quickly change. Last month I predicted that we might start feeling normal again by Christmas, but after having attended so many social events this past month, I'm getting back to normal already. I still put off the gym and clubs and societies, but I'm not sure if that's just me using COVID as an excuse to be lazy at this point. This August I have been to weddings, christenings, social gatherings and even a LAN party that became a pub crawl. It's been really nice, if a little bit strange to see things back to normal again. Even though I know that roughly 1 in every 150 people in this region currently have COVID. I must have been in close contact with people with COVID by now, surely. But so far I've remained well. The last time I felt unwell, in fact, was at the very start of this month when I had my second dose of the vaccine. I covered it in last month's video, but I was bedbound for about 24 hours and erratically hot and cold for a few days after that. It was not nice, and while it's a sign that my body has resistance against the disease, I don't look forward to booster shots, or from a possible COVID infection if it's going to be more of the same. So the current thing people are talking about is about antibodies in the blood versus your body's ability to produce more of them from memory. Before this pandemic, and right up until a few weeks ago actually, I thought it didn't matter if you had active antibodies in your blood or not. I thought that, provided you've already had a disease, then your body can quickly develop a resistance against it again when it needs to. However, with COVID, it seems that you could be ill for a while before your body's resistance can ramp up production again, so it's important that you have antibodies active in your blood in case of infection. But apparently this drops over time, leading to the talk of booster jabs and all that, which obviously isn't ideal. The level of resistance you have against COVID depends on how you've got that resistance. Now, getting COVID and surviving it is the best way to gain a huge resistance against the disease. The newer mRNA vaccines are effective, but apparently this effectiveness drops off over time. By how much and how soon is still a bit uncertain, but 6 months on, they still look comparable to conventional vaccines like the AstraZeneca one. And of the mRNA vaccines, Moderna's protection lasts longer than Pfizer's, because the quantity it delivers in the first place is greater, which might be why people, such as myself, got more side effects from it when we first got the jab. I don't know. The night I went out on, I didn't wear a mask. Obviously I didn't wear a mask, because I don't want to forget to take it off and to be left with a mouth-shaped cider stain on my mask, or to be left with a bright green Robocop cocktail down my front. And yet I still wear a mask when I go to a supermarket, despite that activity being significantly lower risk than a night out. Why do I still wear the mask in that situation? I had to think about this and concluded that a mask on a night out would substantially reduce my enjoyment. Whereas if I'm in a supermarket, then my day has already been ruined, so wearing a mask while doing it doesn't change anything about the experience. I actually like being able to hide from the world. And if I get COVID from a night out, then I could say, hey, at least I had a night out. But getting COVID from the sandwich aisle of Aldi doesn't seem quite as cool. Don't get me started on how wearing a mask won't stop me from getting COVID. I'm reliant on others wearing masks to prevent me from getting COVID, just as they are reliant on me wearing mine. And by wearing a mask, I'm doing my bit to slow the spread, so there. Wearing a mask may help to slow the spread, but cases are still growing. But even this feels different this time around. In previous waves, when it got to this point, I've wanted us to slam on the brakes, to lock down and to buy us more time to get the vaccines rolled out. But we've done that now. Sure, we could wait on the boosters, but I don't think anybody wants to. We've got the vaccine, we waited for the second. We can't just keep waiting around anymore, and I think 2 vaccines is where most people have drawn the line and are now being all like, let's try and return to normal. So while the cases are still slowly growing, it feels like the price we pay for normality. To be able to see friends and family again, to be able to lick snooker balls again in nightclubs. And it feels kind of worth it. We have to remember that deaths are still relatively low. The health services are not being overwhelmed. Yes, it's a pandemic, and yes, people are still dying. It sucks, but in a global pandemic, I don't think 0 deaths is a feasible target. But is the current rate of 100 daily deaths a price worth paying for freedom for the rest of us? That's a rhetorical question, by the way. I can't see cases going down anytime soon. When schools and colleges reopen in September, I expect them to surge. And winter is coming. I've learned that things can change quickly and unexpectedly, so I'm hesitant to try and predict stuff. But I don't see us locking down again. Not after everything the country's done already, and how widespread the vaccine rollout has been. It would be catastrophic for morale if the government announced another lockdown. I notice how anti-vax stuff seems to creep into every video I do. It is a large part of my life. I have to contend with hundreds of comments from anti-vaxxers every month. Some of these people are bold and proud of it, others more sneaky and subtle in what they say. It's all very annoying and contributes to the background noise and fog of war that's present in this pandemic. And it's because of that I'd like to point out the situation with Ivermectin. This has been the miracle cure that many anti-vaxxers have been shouting about, up until now. But very soon I expect that all to go quiet, and for them to begin pretending that they never endorsed it in the first place. Ivermectin has been around for a while, used primarily to kill parasites in livestock. And while it can be used in humans, it isn't for anything remotely resembling COVID. It was pushed by a few scientists as being the miracle cure that governments, for some reason, really didn't want us to have. As being the tablet that can cure COVID and can do away with the need for lockdowns and vaccines. It sounded too good to be true, and sadly it was. The one study that everybody used to push its credibility was found to be deeply flawed, and other studies have been unable to find any benefit to using it to treat COVID. All this has resulted in spicy memes, with people highlighting that it's the people who have been calling the rest of us sheep who are now taking dewormer used in sheep. It's kind of nice to have my methodical, cautious approach towards miracle cures being proven right once again. But on the other hand, it is a shame that we didn't get a miracle cure out of it. But the UK government has authorised the use of certain drugs to help treat COVID. And for some reason I have no problem with these. I guess because they're not being pushed as a miracle cure, or as proof that we should do away with every other protective measure that we're currently taking. I guess the problem I had with Ivermectin was because it seemed like just a flimsy excuse for people whose actual reason for supporting it wasn't because they believed it worked, but simply because they were looking for an excuse to not lock down, to not wear masks, and to not take the vaccine in the first place. When I released last month's COVID video, it received the usual anti-vax and generally nasty comments that this series tends to get these days. But then I think, this series is about documenting stuff, isn't it? And it's comments like these that will eventually be deleted or lost to time once they're proven wrong about one thing or another. I do feel that COVID has made some people very angry, and that the internet has become an even less friendly place because of it. This one was pretty nasty, saying that I'm a bad friend for not arguing with a friend who has a different stance on vaccines to me. Well, since I did debate it with him, I guess this guy takes offence to my friend not having changed their stance from the encounter. I mean, on the surface I see what he's getting at, but then of course he goes too far. He insults me, dismisses my friendship with someone, and shows the hallmarks of somebody who thinks that conflict solves everything. Clearly, he wants nothing more than a fight right here. So I'll just move on. But more on my relationships with anti-vaxxers later on. This here is an interesting comment, because when I first read it, I was in quite a defensive mood, having just trawled through countless aggressive anti-vax comments before reaching this one. And I assumed that this one was just going to be more of the same, where he was proposing that the best way to get immunity to COVID was by getting COVID. But now that I'm viewing this comment in isolation, it appears far more reasonable, as though they're just playing devil's advocate by proposing that some people might not see the need for vaccines if they've already had the disease itself. Or perhaps they're younger people where the risk of the disease is much less, perhaps only several magnitudes greater than the risks from the vaccines themselves. So yeah, with hindsight, faith in humanity restored slightly here, only to be immediately crushed by this guy, who repeatedly makes up strong anecdotal proof to back up their particular stance on the topic with which to win internet debates with, which it looks like he did in this case. But this is the problem. If you try to be reasonable with the unreasonable, you end up meeting them halfway, which only ever works out in their favour. It's why a scientist will always lose a debate against a fanatic, because one side is constrained by logic and reason, and the other is not. And to an outsider, the confidence and authority that the fanatic possesses will always make them look like they're the side that knows the most. There's one guy over on Odyssey who I've grown quite fond of. His English is broken, and what he does is to post a huge paragraph of blatant misinformation. And when I say blatant, I mean that. He'll make a claim, then post a link to somewhere disproving what he said. It's irresistible bait for me to respond to which he'll immediately respond again, but with something completely unrelated, but equally wrong and equally disprovable. So I think I started out responding to this guy for fun, and so that such blatant misinformation didn't go unchallenged. But I started to find his comments useful, because they often mirrored the latest misinformation that I had seen in other places. And not only that, he'd link me to the sources of this misinformation. It was fascinating. It was like this guy was my portal to the other side. After a while, given how quickly he responded and with how much random stuff, I wondered if he might have been a bot, and proceeded to respond with random stuff to see if it influenced his response. I don't think he is a bot. He's just a person with a lot of spare time and with a very bot-like way of wording things. This next bit of the video is why it's taken a week to get this video out. It's about my friendships with anti-vaxxers. I revised this bit of the video many times, but ultimately decided not to include it. Because why should I try and explain and justify my friendships to strangers online? So instead I'll just summarise. Online, people easily condense others down to a single opinion about a single topic. Once you do that, you can easily justify being nasty to them and disowning them. It is much easier to do online than in real life, and especially to strangers, as erasing them from your life isn't a major loss. But anybody with real life friends will know that there is more to somebody than a singular opinion about a singular topic. And even if you disagree with them about something, the correct course of action isn't necessarily to argue about it endlessly and to cut them out of your life for good, despite how people online are so quick to confidently state that that's what you should be doing. I shouldn't be surprised. You only have to look at relationship advice online to see how many people are quick to suggest the nuclear option of breaking up with them. Which again, I think ignores the intricacies that make a relationship in the first place. So when I'm told to end a friendship that I've had with someone for 5 or 10 years out of spite because they're anti-vax, I don't want to. I don't even see how cutting communication with anti-vaxxers is going to help anything. This pandemic has created enough rifts in society already. So why are people so keen to create even more? So while I'm not exactly going to go out of my way to befriend anti-vaxxers, I'm not going to cut friends out of my life because they aren't getting the vaccine. If it's mentioned in conversation, then I'll express my disappointment. And if they have questions about it, I'll answer them. But no, having been presented with this situation, I've concluded that I'm not cutting these people out of my life for good. Honestly, if I look at how to tackle disagreements, well, wars are obviously the worst way to go about it, but extreme internet chat rooms and shouting obscenities at people on YouTube are still pretty bad things to do. And all of these actions involve dehumanising the opposition. So I propose a radical sounding strategy. How about we try to see people as people, with as much intricacy and complexity as we like to believe that we have? How about we can disagree about certain things, while still finding value in other aspects of their personality? I think a lot could be solved by locking people with disagreeing opinions in rooms together, with a bunch of pizzas and some bouncers to ensure that the peace is kept. These sides might never agree about that particular topic, but it doesn't mean that progress can't be made in others. It'll make the sides more empathic, and perhaps after that, meaningful progress could be made. So yeah, let's lock disagreeing world leaders in a room together. Put vaxxers in with anti-vaxxers. We could even put anti-vaxxers in a room with people with COVID. A lot of progress could be made. So that's my thinking behind what I did next with my friend over on Odyssey. I stopped arguing with him because it wasn't getting anywhere, and never would. And instead, I just started asking him questions, to which he'd attempt to construct a response that conveyed his thoughts. And this approach benefited the both of us. I much preferred this because the conversation became more coherent, and I think he preferred it as well because he stopped spamming links to stuff and started opening up to me about his feelings on the matter, which in my opinion is the stuff that helps me to understand his beliefs, even if I may not agree with them. He went from posting paragraphs of misinformation to, well, still lots of paragraphs of misinformation, but in between these were ones with genuine concern for people. He was fearful for loved ones. He is genuinely concerned that the government is out to kill everybody. And I do honestly believe that he believes what he's saying. All this time I've assumed it's me taking my vaccines and wearing my mask who's appeared the scared one in this pandemic. But this guy right here is downright terrified of the medical profession and the governments around the world. To him, COVID isn't even a problem. I think days go by where he forgets it even exists, because his mind is too caught up worrying about the vaccines and how they're supposedly a bioweapon being used to depopulate the planet. My goodness. No wonder he's so passionate about this stuff. I do wish there was something I could say to reassure him, or at least to help him to see it from my point of view. A video series, perhaps. He has linked me to a side of the COVID debate that, I'll be honest, is utter shite, but it's sad to see people such as him so caught up in it. He's as much of a victim as anybody here, apart from all those people dead from COVID. I guess they're the bigger victims, but you get what I'm trying to say. So hopefully, by showing some more understanding, he'll return the favour. Oh no, he's back to spamming paragraphs of misinformation already. No one's arguing with you anymore, Lexel. You can stop already. Tolerance is key, and so is acceptance. Despite what some people online might think, you can't and shouldn't try to argue COVID with everybody you encounter. Yes, I get pulled into arguments from time to time. Sometimes I get tricked into discussing it by a particularly tempting or naive sounding bait. But I'm getting better at simply screenshotting that stuff and moving on. And I know it's better for my mental health to do just that. I now accept that I can't change the minds of people whose minds have already been made up, no matter how strong my points are, and no matter how flawed their reasoning may be. I know that I can't reason with people whose stance on this matter has become their identity as a person. The only way I can live my life without continual seething hatred and frustration with humanity is to try and leave these debates to where it's appropriate to have them, and for when I actually want to have them, with people I want to have those discussions with. We're already living in the worst pandemic in living memory. Let's not make it any worse than it needs to be. So I'll leave this video by saying how lovely this month has been, to be able to go out and about, and to see others enjoying themselves. At one of the weddings I attended, while the guests obviously had a good time, it was evident that the staff were too. For some of these people, they were young enough that this was the first big social event that they had ever catered for. As the night went on, everybody got more laid back and the staff ended up joining the rest of us on the dance floor, or for the numerous activities dotted about the place. One even asked me for a dance, which made me feel very young and very old at the same time. It was a really nice event. I'll certainly remember it for a long time to come. As will they. For some people, COVID has caused their weddings to be delayed by several years. For others, their entire working life has been put on hold because of it. Last year, the Plymouth fireworks display was cancelled due to COVID, but this year it went ahead as planned again. It brought back lots of memories that I was surprised I'd forgotten about. That warm summer air that you get at night, walking through the crowds to find a seat, gimmicky stalls full of flashing toys, the smell of hot dogs and barbecues, sitting on that dog poo that was hidden in the long grass. COVID has seen away to most of that, but it's great to finally be able to do all that stuff again. Everybody has different levels of risk averseness. Some people never locked down, so now feels no different for them. Others, like myself, have been more cautious, but I have to remind myself that I was being cautious to give the vaccines time to roll out, which they now have been, so now I've got to get back to normal. But there are still people who are being cautious. My parents are still in direct contact with vulnerable people, so I understand their decision to try and avoid crowds. But it does still make me feel guilty when I tell them about the stuff I've been up to, and makes me think twice about meeting up with them in case I'm the one to bring COVID into their circle. So England may have reopened, but it isn't back to normal just yet, and for some people it could be a long time before they're comfortable to frequent a public place again. I still hate the idea that life may never quite return to how it was before. The disease may mutate, the situation may change. COVID might always be there, somewhere in the back of our minds, or as something horrible that we get ill from once a year or whatever. But England is finally approaching that point where social events are no longer the unthinkably dangerous or irresponsible things that they were 6 or 12 months ago. To all of you whose countries are still going through the worst of it, who think it'll never end, I want you to know that there will be a moment, sometime in the future, when you find yourself at a large public event, and any fear or compromises from COVID are forgotten and replaced with smiling faces and people having a good time, even if cases remain high. Even if the threat is still there to some degree. The UK does still have problems with COVID, but the population's patience and willingness to vaccinate is starting to pay off. And while we're not out of the woods just yet, I can't think of another country that I'd rather be in right now.